Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming back and listening again. Or if you're new, thank you for listening. Today, we're going to have a great episode. We're starting a new series about forgotten lures. And this one is called Maybe the Best Soft Bait Lure Ever. So, we're going to get into that in a minute, but let's get into the news. So, in the news today, we see that Bass Pro Shops is opening a new store in Spring, Texas on Wednesday, October 2nd. It's going to be the 16th Bass Pro Shops. It's going to be a 125,000 square feet store. And on the opening day, they're going to have a fun family activities and giveaways. They're going to have 10% of sales are going to go to local conservation groups. And also there's going to be a performance by Blaine Holcomb, which is a country singer, I believe. So get out there and check out your new Bass Pro Shops if you're in Texas, near Spring, Texas, and check out those cool activities they're going to be doing on that open day, October 2nd, and go out and pick up some new lures to try out. Have a great time there. If you get out there, let us know how it goes. More news, something local for us here in Massachusetts, is that Mass Wildlife in the last week of September will start stocking trout. They're going to start can't talk right now, sorry. They're going to start stocking trout. There's going to be a total of 73,750 trout species across the state stocked into lakes and rivers. They're going to stock 27,000 of rainbow trouts over 14 inches, 40,200 rainbows that are over 12 inches, and 6,500 brown trouts that are over 12 inches. So it is that time of year now for the stocking of trout with the little nip in the air, the beginning of fall here. Bass fishing starting to slow down, saltwater starting to slow down. A lot of people are switching over to trout fishing. It's a good change up. So it's not just Massachusetts stocking now. I'm not going to get into every state, but look on your state websites and see if they're starting a stocking plan and go check out on Massachusetts. You can look up what river, what pond, what lake you can look up and what they are stocking. So wherever you go to fish and if they're stocking for trout, check it out, and they should be stocking very soon. They were going to start at the end of the month with some of the waterways, and by early October, I think pretty much everywhere is going to be stocked. So get out there with that little change in the air and want to change up and try some trout fishing over some bass fishing. Give that a try. It's always a fun time. Just wanted to get that out of the way. Well, let's get into our main story now that you're all probably here to listen to. And it's the forgotten lure, the best soft bait lure ever. And it is a very underrated and forgotten about lure, but still has a good use, and it is very easy to use. And what it is the Curly Tail Grub. It's one of those lures, if you could only have one lure, this might be it. This is a good bait for now that we're hitting to the fall season when bass are starting to feed on bait fish, and they're smaller bait fish at this time of year they're feeding on. Downsizing lures helps a lot in this time of year, and a grub is a perfect lure to give a try. And also, it's not a lure that a lot of people are using nowadays. A lot more people are just using types of swim baits and flukes. A lot of people have forgotten about the grub, but I've been fishing grubs since I was young, and they're a great lure, and they still work to this day. They're great for clear water, pressured waters, and it's kind of funny because they're basically considered the first swim bait. They were never referred that way, but if you look to it now, that's typically what they were created to do, to make that fluttering tail look like a fleeing bait fish. But it's a very versatile lure that you can swim it, you can burn it real fast, you can slow it reel, you can do a stop and go. You could even bump and hop along the bottom or burn it so fast across the top of the water. It kind of works almost in every situation, but typically most people will just use it as a swim bait, like basically just a straight slower reel and like a stop and go pattern. If it's something you've been fishing for a while, it's like a paddle tail swim bait, something like that, pick up a grub, do the change, give that a try. I'm going to talk to you, like we usually do, about where the grub came from and learn a little bit of history on the grub, and then we'll get back into some techniques that might help you catch more fish with a grub and why you should use it like we just talked about. It's a great lure to give a try to. So in 1972, the man named Rick Well invented the grub. He was at a fishing show and he noticed a French-made lure. It was an eel with a curled tail, but it was with a harder type plastic or harder rubber, not like a soft plastic. And it wasn't very pliable. So he started working on a design, and he downsized it to this little 4-inch chubby body with a little curly tail, and he used a soft, pliable plastic instead of a hard rubber. It was a very common thing, was this hard rubber with older lures back in the day, and they didn't have much action to them because you can date some of these plastic lures going back to the late 1800s, but not until they were basically the most modern one. You could talk about the DeLong lures that we talked about, and the cream lures that you could talk about for the first worms, but really the man's jelly worm was the first like rubber compound that was that soft pliable plastic that we use today to typically was on the man's rubber worms, and those were the jelly worms. Really the grub, when he came out with this, there was really like the second big soft bait. Really, before the grub, there was really only worms, and there was nothing with a tail action that was a soft bait that worked quite like this. So it was an amazing product that really took off right when it started. So in 1973, Rick Well ended up teaming up with Glenn Carver, and Glenn Carver handled the manufacturing end where Rick did the marketing and sales. He liked that name, Mr. Twister, but he found out that someone already held the rights to that name, so he had to buy it out. So Wells, being the smart marketing guy, he really knew that Mr. Twister name was perfect match for his new lure, that grub with the twisty tail. It was worth him to pay the $5,000 to get that name from the person that already had it. They both worked on new products and designs over the years. And first was that 4-inch Curly Tail Grub. Then they came out with a 3-inch and a 2-inch that was added to their lineup. Largemouth bass fishing was blowing up across the country as Bassmaster tournaments started. In the first several months, they could only ship about a third of their orders, they were so popular. But they wanted to keep it fair, so rather than giving full orders to certain dealers, they made sure that everyone got some. And back to that curly tail, they had this small tank with like a little blower that would move the water, so people could go in and push this button to activate the current and watch the tail do its thing and make the wiggly swimming motion of the tail. And they would bring this to tackle shops and fishing shows and set them up. It was very smart advertising and marketing strategy by them. Everything was hand injected back then. They were making 50,000 lures a day, and they couldn't keep up with demand. In the first 6 months, of course, knockoffs were coming out. Quickly found out defending patents wasn't worth the time or energy. All these competitors had to do was change the patent by 10% to get around the protective status. So soon everyone was making curly tails. All they could do was push ahead and keep making their lures. To stay on top, Mr. Twister launched rounds of new lures each year. At one point, they offered 200 new soft plastics in a 5-year span. Mr. Twister maybe sold the most lures in the 1980s. In 1985, Mr. Twister sold to Sheldon's Inc., the makers of the world-famous Mep spinner. After Sheldon's bought it, they came out with the Sassy Shad, one of the original swim bait paddle tails. They also came out with the Swinsation Grub with a paddle tail. It also had curly pectoral fin appendages for yet another take on Wells' original grub design. Rick Wells now works for Wahoo Fishing Products in Punta Gorda, Florida. He designs and makes lures for other companies, including Panther Martin. And if you don't know Panther Martin, they're a popular company that makes inline spinners and that type of lures that you'll see with like trout fishing. He's not just a soft bait designer now. Makes jig heads, spinner baits, spools, or even ice fishing lures. And nowadays, pretty much every manufacturer makes their own grub with a twisty tail style. There's also twin tails, flat tails, paddle tails. We got grubs that are now considered the spider grub or a hula grub, which I talked a little bit about the hula grub in the Gary Yamato Cinco episode a few back. So if you want to learn more about those lures, you could go listen to that episode. But this is all thanks to Rick Wells and his innovative design in some French-made eel lure with a twisty tail that he got to see. So thanks to them, whoever that was, if they're even still in business. But without that, we would not have all these styles of grubs or maybe even paddle tails. And there's also new styles of grubs coming out to this day. You got the Yamatanaku from Gary Yamato, which is kind of a different take, but it's still classified as a grub, where it has a very fat body and like a fat tail. And I've heard very good things that people are catching fish with these like crazy. And it just came out in 2023, and I think it might have been rated one of the best new lures. It ain't much to look at, but just like the Cinco worm, people didn't think much of that. So this lure might be really good. I've been waiting to try to get my hands on some, and I haven't seemed to be able to find any. But when I get some time to actually find these and get out and fish with them, I'll let you guys know what I think of them. Maybe I'll do a little quick review on those. So let's get into a little bit how I use a grub and different ways how to use it. A grub basically, in a situation like we talked about, works good in like a clear water situation or a current in a pressured situation. And it can basically replace like a spinner bait or a crankbait and kind of do the same things they do. But they're also way more versatile, as we talked about, that they can be used for different techniques. So using a grub instead of a crankbait or a spinner bait, it just gives you that more subtle, less commotion in the water. Sometimes the fish just like that over a loud spinner bait with the vibrating blades or the loud crankbait with the rattles inside. Sometimes they just like that subtle little lure that is made of a plastic and not a hard bait. Sometimes it's just that little change, and that can do the same things. It's a great switch up if you're not getting the bites with those lures. Some people also use them to connect them as a trailer to like a spinnerbait, chatterbait, or a skirted jig. So using the grub as a trailer, it's just something that's a lot smaller if you don't want to add too much weight or heft or bulk to that lure. So instead of putting something bigger on there, a grub will look perfect for a little trailer on one of those spinner baits, jigs, or chatterbaits. So my history with the grub over the years, I first started fishing in the 1980s, and they were really popular, and I used to use them and catch a lot of fish with them. But they definitely seemed like by the 90s they kind of fell out of favor with the Sluggo coming out, the Cinco, and these other newer soft baits. It seemed like it kind of just slipped into history a little bit. And with the swim baits nowadays, the paddle tails, you don't see much of them. So it's definitely an underutilized lure that has full potential to work very well in pressured waters, just for fish to see something different. You got to pick these up and give them a shot. And basically, I haven't grub fished myself for a while, so I actually went fishing the other day, and I had some packs of grubs, and I had a Bass Pro Shops brand, and I don't buy too many Bass Pro Shop brand lures, but I think when I was picking up some grubs last year, I saw a pack of these, and they kind of reminded me like the old school grubs I used to fish with, and they were just a basic curly tail, like the Mr. Twister original grubs. And I just got, the color was the watermelon candy 4-inch, and it has like a purple and red reflective flakes in it. And it's a great style grub to fish in some nice clear water, which I'm mostly fishing around here. It's pretty clear. I took them out and I was fishing with those. I saw some fish jumping, and they were jumping. Well, actually, it was the bait fish jumping. I saw the bait fish jumping, so I figured there was a predator fish there, and I threw this grub. And right when it hit the water, I don't even know if I turned the reel yet. I hit a smallmouth, and it was a decent sized smallmouth. And then later in the day, right when I was about to give up fishing, I was getting a few bites on the way back. I threw the grub and just did a pretty steady pace reel across the water. Ended up connecting with a 4 to 5 pound largemouth bass. Of course, I got it right to the side of the boat and it shook it off. That's one of the negatives I see of fishing with a grub, because you don't have not a very big hook on there. So the bass can easily shake them out of their mouth if they can. So you got to try to make sure to keep that bass under the water. Don't let them jump, because they can disconnect that hook. So last week I went out again fishing with the grub to give it another try here, and I ended up going in the same spot where I was before, where I was catching bass. And this is right before we had to change the fall, and it was kind of a weather change. It was starting to get a little chilly. The bass just had luck draw. I could not catch them. I also tried a couple other lures. They weren't hitting anything. But I'll tell you one thing. I was nailing yellow perch left and right with the same grub. Like I said, they're a multi-species type lure. You can throw them out and you'll catch a lot. So I was catching yellow perch and also pickerel. Pickerel are back and biting really good. So it kind of slowed down a little bit for bass. We're kind of having that early fall, end of the summer, where they kind of, everyone knows it gets a little tough to fish for bass this time of year sometimes. A lot of people will veer away from it, including myself sometimes, and start targeting stock trout, which, like I talked about in the news, they're starting to stock trout around here. But a grub is a great lure. Even if you're not catching the bass, you're going to catch something, and it is a good fall time lure. It's a good one to talk about because they are actively going after those bait fish, and it does resemble a bait fish very well. It doesn't look like the typical paddle tails or swim baits that people are throwing at this time. And the bait fish are typically around the size of these little grubs, so match the hatch, as they say. So it does work really well. It's a good lure to throw out. It's very simple. It's a great starting lure, a great lure if you're an expert fisherman. And there's been a lot of tournaments won on these grubs over the years. You just don't hear about it as much anymore. Basically, like, all you need is like a medium or even a medium light. And I spool that up with, I just found this new line that I really like, and it's very affordable. It's a Yuzuri hybrid line, which is a mono fluoro hybrid type style line, and it works really well. And I've been finding it for like $6 and change. It's even more affordable than like a Berkeley Trilene or like a Stren monofilament, and way more affordable than a fluoro. And I don't know if they're going to still keep making this. I don't know how popular this line is, but I use a 6 pound or an 8 pound in that, and I've been using it for a while now, and it works really well. And I think it gives you a little best of both worlds. Gives you good knot strength, gives you a little more of a sinking action like a fluoro, but not too much. So for something that's swimming in the water, it gives you a good sinking, not too fast. Like, you might want to use a fluoro if you're doing something that's bumping along the bottom. But if you're doing a swimming action, I think a good like a hybrid there, copoly type line will work great for that situation. Or if you want to keep it up high in the water column, you might want to use like a monofilament. And on to other ways people can rig these. They can also rig them with like a drop shot style Carolina rig. So you can do almost anything with a grub rigging style. I typically stick to the normal round head jig, which most people like, between like a 1/16 to a 1/4 ounce. I found a 1/8 ounce is a good solid in the middle for most of the water depth I'm covering. You might want to go a little heavier if you're going real deep with like a 1/4 ounce, or if you're going something real shallow, you might want to go with like a 1/16 ounce. But I just keep it simple and go with the old school round head jig, and I think that works good all around. But basically, you can rig a grub just like any other type of soft plastic, but you do have to stay to that bigger style grub if you want to go Texas style rig, and 1/8 ounce round head jig. But there's different ways to also rig these. We'll get a little more into that, but that's typically how I set it up, and I'll just swim it, do a stop and go. I don't really bump the bottom, or I'll use some other lure with me. I usually have at least 2 rods with me when I'm fishing, and I'll use another type of lure for that. But like I said, if you're out with 1 rod and that's all you have, the grub can do multiple things. You can swim it, burn it, top water it. You can bump it off the bottom like a little jig. So you can do everything with it. So if you're out with just that one lure, it is very versatile that you can basically use it any way you want to catch fish. So that was kind of like the way I fish the grub. So I'll just do it the basic way. I don't get too advanced. Usually if I'm going to run something along the bottom, I'll use a different type of lure than a grub. Or if I'm going to top water, I'm going to use a top water. But that's what I wanted to show you, that it is one of the most versatile lures that you can use for different situations. So if you are just starting out and you just could have 1 rod and 1 lure and go out to fish with, and you want to just catch different fish and be able to easily catch them, I would say the only downfall, the regularly typical rigging of that grub, is, like I said, it's a smaller hook, so it's a little easier for these fish to get off when they're fighting, and also that it's not really weedless. But let's get into some other rigging styles that's not just the atypical grub rigging styles. So there's different types, like we talked about. There's like the twin tails, where it'll give you a little different look, or the flat tails, or obviously the paddle tails. And there's also, like we said, like the spider or hula style grub. With those type, I would fish it a little different with those spider hula grubs. I would use like a football head type lure and run that off the bottom and do like the bounce and hop that. You could also, if you get the bigger style grubs, you can Texas rig it so it's weedless if you want to do something where you're pitching into brush and other areas where you'd get hung up with an exposed hook. This is a lure if you're in area where you can fish saltwater and freshwater like I am, and I haven't done this myself, but you can go out and use a grub and catch saltwater fish just as well as freshwater fish. So it catches all types of species. And I was looking up, you can catch cod up here, which is an awesome fish to eat, and you can catch stripers with them. You can catch all sorts of saltwater fish with them. And in the freshwater, you can catch walleye, and you can catch white perch, and like I said, yellow perch, pickerel. You can basically, there's not a species this lure doesn't catch. So it's a great all-around lure, soft bait that'll work in all water situations really to catch you something. You might have to upsize it a little bit if you're going for a certain species, or downsize it a little bit. You want to catch panfish, you might want to run a little like 1.5 inch grub. And you can catch trout with them, but you probably want to go with a little bit of a smaller. But like I said, typically I stick to that atypical 4-inch style, and that will catch you many different types of fish for sure. You won't probably catch too many panfish or trout on it because it's a little too big, but you're going to get perch and pickerel and bass. And someday maybe I'll take a grub and I will maybe go trek it out in the salt water and see what I can catch with it and let you guys know in a future episode, because it is a very easy lure to use, and it's a good one just to go out. And if you just have 1 rod and you're just starting out, it's a good one to give a try. There's other types of jig heads you can use on there. You can also use like a darter style jig head if you just want to do swim in it. There's also, like I said, the football style jig head where you want to run it along the bottom. And it can also give you kind of that crankbait style like wobble action to it as well. If you're using that spider or hulu grub, you can get that kind of a crawdad effect motion with it running across the bottom and hopping it up and down. So you might not be doing that bait fish style with it. You're going to be more doing like a crawfish style effect. So you might want to match the hatch to your crawfish color in your area if you're using it for that. Don't want to use shaky head jigs. That's probably like the only one you don't want to use with the grub, from the way it takes away from their tail action if you're using a curly tailed. And then also the way you hook into the body with a hook, you want to opposite the hook away from the tail, because you can pin up your hook on your tail every once in a while with a curly tail motion. It happens to me. You just unhook it if it does happen. But if you rig the hook opposite of the tail, you have less chances of that happening. So that's a little trick there with that. It's also a good lure that you can just troll. If you want to troll it behind you, you can troll it like a spoon or like a crankbait. You can troll it and you can jig it. This is stuff I typically don't do, but it's doable. So you can troll, jig, and it's great. Like we said, in like if you fish rivers a lot and current, it's a great lure for that type of deal. Yeah, the curly tail just adds that natural motion that a lot of lures don't give you. It gives you that natural swimming motion that you would see from a bait fish. Like I said, you can catch everything on these things. It's just, you need to pick up some grubs if you don't have them. And they're great just starting out lure, or if you're an avid fisherman, been fishing forever and haven't tried them, you got to try them out. They're very popular in the spring and fall when the bass are mainly fishing on bait fish, but you can use them year round. And like I said, use different style grubs for different style situations. But definitely, if you're going to go out, grab that curly tail grub. And if you want to grab the Mr. Twister, they still make them. I actually saw them the other day. I didn't pick any up at a Dick's Sporting Goods, but I did see them. They still had them. So I was going to pick some up actually, but they just didn't have the colors I really wanted. Yeah, go out there, pick them out. They're definitely a forgotten, underrated lure that is very easy to use. Like I said, it might be, or maybe be, the best soft bait lure ever created. The good old curly tail grub. So I hope you guys like this episode. I hope you continue to listen, and we'll be coming out with a new episode bi-weekly, if not weekly, coming up. So stay tuned for some new episodes. Definitely leave us a good review. We appreciate you listening, following, sharing, liking, and get out there and catch some fish. Have a great day, guys. Take care. Happy fall.